Imagine being shown to your bedroom in a grand Victorian mansion after sunset. The house is enormous, the ceilings are high, the corridors seem to stretch forever, and somewhere below you can hear the faint sounds of servants finishing the evening chores. At first, the room might look almost magical. There is a large wooden bed, heavy curtains, polished furniture, a fireplace glowing softly in the corner, and perhaps a dressing table covered with brushes, bottles, combs, and other personal belongings. Everything appears elegant, expensive, and carefully arranged, but when the candles are lowered and the door finally closes, the experience of sleeping in a Victorian mansion becomes very different from the romantic image we often have today. There were no electric switches beside the bed, no central heating keeping every room at the same comfortable temperature, no silent refrigerator humming in another room, and certainly no phone glowing beside the pillow. Night in a Victorian mansion was an experience shaped by darkness, cold fire servants, strange household noises, strict routines, and an almost theatrical separation between the private world of the bedroom and the rest of the enormous house. For a wealthy Victorian family, the bedroom was not simply a place where you went to sleep. It was a carefully managed space where dressing, washing, reading, conversation, illness, childbirth, personal reflection, and eventually sleep all took place. And despite the enormous houses, bedrooms were not always the warm, peaceful sanctuaries we might imagine. The first thing you would probably notice was the temperature. Victorian mansions could be beautiful, but they were often difficult to heat evenly. A fireplace could make one part of a bedroom wonderfully warm while leaving the opposite side surprisingly cold. Large windows, high ceilings, thick walls, and gaps around doors could allow cold air to move through the room. In winter, getting out of bed could become an unpleasant adventure. The bed itself might be warm beneath layers of blankets, while the room around it remained bitterly cold. Wealthier households could afford servants to prepare bedrooms before bedtime. A fire might be lit in the afternoon or evening, so that the room would be more comfortable when the family retired. Bed warmers could also be used to heat the sheets. These were often metal containers filled with hot coals or hot water, designed to be moved carefully beneath the blankets. The idea was simple. Instead of climbing into an icy bed, you could slide into sheets that had already been warmed. But the comfort did not last forever. As the night continued, the fire weakened and the heat gradually disappeared. You could wake in the early morning and discover that the room had become cold again. The bed itself was another important part of the experience. Victorian beds could be substantial pieces of furniture, often made from dark polished wood or metal, with elaborate headboards, carved details, curtains, and decorative fabric. In wealthy homes, a bedroom might contain a large four-poster bed that dominated the room. Bed curtains were not merely decorative. They could provide privacy and help create a smaller, warmer space around the sleeper. In a huge bedroom with high ceilings, closing the curtains around the bed could make the space feel more enclosed. The bed became almost a little room within the room. Once the curtains were drawn, the outside world disappeared into darkness. But this darkness was far deeper than what we experience today. A Victorian mansion after midnight could become almost completely black. Streetlights were limited, electricity was not yet universal, and moonlight depended entirely on the weather and the position of the windows. A candle on a bedside table might provide a small circle of light, but beyond it there could be nothing but shadows, and the mansion itself would never become completely silent. This is one of the strangest things about sleeping in a huge old house. During the day, a mansion could be filled with movement. Servants carried dishes through corridors, doors opened and closed, fires were tended, guests talked in drawing rooms, horses moved outside, and household work continued from one end of the building to another. At night, most of this activity faded, but the building itself seemed to come alive. Wooden floors could creak as temperatures changed. Pipes might make unfamiliar noises. Wind could move around chimneys and windows. Shutters could rattle during a storm. Somewhere in the distance, a clock might strike the hour. A servant could quietly walk down a corridor carrying a candle. A door might close several rooms away, producing a sound that seemed much louder in the stillness of the night. If you were unfamiliar with the house, every one of these noises could make you wonder what was happening outside your bedroom. The clocks would be particularly noticeable. Victorian homes often contained impressive clocks, and large households could have several of them. A clock in a hallway or downstairs room might strike at regular intervals throughout the night. Imagine waking suddenly in complete darkness and hearing a deep series of chimes somewhere beyond the bedroom door. You might lie still and count them, trying to determine whether it was 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or 3. Without a glowing digital clock on the bedside table, knowing the exact time required either a mechanical clock, a watch, or simply guessing from the sounds of the house. For someone accustomed to modern bedrooms, the experience could feel surprisingly disconnected from time. Privacy was also more complicated than we might imagine. A wealthy Victorian person could have a beautiful private bedroom, but that did not necessarily mean complete independence. Servants were an essential part of mansion life. Depending on the household, a valet, lady's maid, housemaid, or other servant could be responsible for preparing the bedroom, laying out clothing, lighting fires, carrying hot water, cleaning the room, and helping with personal routines. The boundary between private and public life could therefore be quite different from ours. Someone might enter your bedroom in the morning to open curtains, bring breakfast, remove used water, or attend to the fire. In some households, the bedroom was a highly managed environment rather than a completely personal retreat. Morning itself could begin with the arrival of a servant. Instead of waking to a phone alarm, you might wake to footsteps outside the door, a gentle knock, or curtains being opened. If the household was especially formal, there could be a carefully established routine. Hot water would be brought upstairs for washing, clothing would be prepared, and fires might be tended. The bedroom would slowly transition from a private nighttime space into a working part of the household. This was especially important because Victorian ideas about cleanliness, appearance, class, and proper behaviour were closely connected to daily routines. Washing before bed could also be very different from what we consider normal today. A modern bathroom with a hot shower was not part of the ordinary Victorian bedroom experience. Some wealthy mansions had increasingly sophisticated plumbing and bathrooms, especially toward the end of the 19th century, but standards varied enormously. In many bedrooms, washing could involve a basin, jug, soap, cloth, and water carried by servants. A person might wash the face, hands, neck, and other parts of the body rather than taking the kind of full shower that is routine today. Bathing was more complicated because filling a bathtub required significant amounts of hot water, and in many houses that water had to be heated and transported. The wealthy could certainly enjoy much greater access to bathing than poorer households. But modern expectations of effortless hot water did not exist. The smell of the bedroom would also have been different. There might be the scent of burning coal or wood from the fireplace, candle wax, soap, perfume, furniture polish, flowers, fabric, and perhaps faint traces of smoke. In a large mansion, ventilation could be imperfect. Heavy curtains and upholstered furniture could hold smells. Fires produced their own odours, and candles made from different materials could have distinctive scents. Even a beautifully decorated bedroom would not necessarily smell like the clean, neutral spaces we associate with modern hotels. Lighting was another major difference. Before electric lighting became widespread, candles and oil lamps were essential. A single candle did not illuminate a room in the way a modern ceiling light does. Instead, it created a small pool of warm light surrounded by darkness. Shadows moved across walls and furniture as the flame flickered. A person reading in bed might need to position the candle carefully too far away, and the pages became difficult to see, too close, and the flame could become dangerous. Candles could be knocked over, curtains could catch fire, and an unattended flame was always a risk. Wealthy households sometimes had elaborate lighting systems, and gas lighting became increasingly common. But the bedroom at night was still dramatically darker than a modern bedroom. This darkness changed how people experienced the mansion. During daylight, the house could seem impressive and orderly. At night, its size became almost intimidating. A bedroom might be located at the end of a long corridor, several floors above the entrance hall. Beyond the closed door were staircases, servant passages, unused rooms, attics, storage spaces, and perhaps entire wings of the mansion that were rarely visited at night. You could know intellectually that the house was safe, yet the darkness could make familiar spaces feel unfamiliar. There was another part of the Victorian nighttime experience that would become obvious only after spending several nights in the house. The bedroom was never completely isolated from the social life of the mansion. Even when the door was closed, the routines of other people continued beyond it. A late arriving guest might enter through the front door. Someone might cross the entrance hall carrying a lamp. A maid could be quietly preparing another bedroom. A family member might still be reading in a nearby room. If there were servants' quarters above or below, footsteps could continue long after the family had gone to bed. In a large mansion, sound travelled in strange ways. A conversation that was barely audible in one room could become surprisingly clear in another, while a loud noise downstairs might sound distant and mysterious from an upper bedroom. The architecture itself shaped the nighttime experience. Bedrooms could also differ dramatically depending on where they were located. A principal bedroom overlooking the gardens might be spacious, richly decorated, and relatively quiet. A guest room might be smaller, but still elegant, carefully prepared for visitors. Children's rooms might be arranged around the nursery, while servants slept in much simpler quarters. Someone sleeping near the kitchen might hear more activity early in the morning, while someone at the top of the house might experience more wind and temperature changes. The mansion therefore had its own geography of sleep, with comfort and inconvenience distributed according to status, function, and location. The upper floors could be especially cold. Heat naturally moved upward, but it did not necessarily make the highest bedrooms comfortable. Roof spaces were exposed to outdoor temperatures, and large windows could allow cold air to enter. In summer, upper rooms could become surprisingly warm because heat accumulated under the roof. The same mansion that felt chilly in winter could become stuffy during a hot summer night. Without modern air conditioning, temperature control depended on windows, curtains, fireplaces, ventilation, fans, and whatever natural breeze the building received. During summer, the Victorian bedroom could therefore look completely different. Heavy curtains might be opened during the day to allow air to circulate. Windows could be left partially open at night. Although insects and outdoor noises became part of the experience. In the countryside, the sound of crickets, birds, distant animals, or wind moving through trees might enter the room. In towns and cities, the sounds could be very different. Carriages, horses, pedestrians, industrial activity, and late-night traffic could disturb the quiet. A wealthy mansion did not necessarily mean a silent neighborhood. The bed curtains themselves could also change the atmosphere. When closed, they created a private enclosure around the sleeper. In winter, this could make the bed feel warmer and more protected. In summer, however, heavy curtains might make the space feel stuffy. Their fabric could collect dust and require regular cleaning. Yet visually, They contributed enormously to the image of Victorian luxury. A bed surrounded by elaborate curtains immediately communicated wealth, privacy, and status. The bedroom was also a place where clothing became part of the nighttime ritual. Modern people can simply change into pajamas and place their daytime clothes in a wardrobe. In a wealthy Victorian household, dressing could involve considerably more preparation. Clothing was expensive, complicated, and often required assistance. A lady's maid might help prepare garments, arrange hair, and organize accessories. A gentleman's valet might perform similar duties. Nightwear itself could be elaborate, depending on social class and personal preference. The process of getting ready for bed was therefore not necessarily a quick private routine. It could be another carefully organized part of household life. For an upper-class woman, removing the day's clothing could involve layers of garments, corsetry, dresses, stockings, and other pieces. Although the exact routine varied considerably, clothing could require time and assistance. Hair was another consideration. Long hair could require brushing, arranging, or braiding before sleep. A bedroom therefore became a transitional space where the formal public appearance of the day was gradually replaced by the more private appearance of night. For men too, personal grooming could be extensive. A gentleman might shave, wash, change clothes, arrange his belongings, and prepare for the next day. A valet could make the process much easier. The existence of servants meant that wealthy Victorians could outsource many of the small tasks that modern people perform themselves. But this convenience came at a cost that was largely invisible to the people receiving it. Somebody else had to wake early, carry the water, clean the room, prepare the clothing, and maintain the equipment. One of the most striking things about Victorian mansions was the enormous amount of labour hidden behind apparently effortless comfort. A modern person can turn on a light with one movement. A Victorian servant might have needed to trim a candle, light a lamp, replenish fuel, or maintain a gas fixture. A modern person turns a tap and receives hot water. A servant might have carried heavy containers of water upstairs. A modern person adjusts a thermostat. Victorian households relied on fires, clothing, bedding, architecture, and human labour. Even the simple act of making a bed was more labour-intensive than it appears. This meant that bedtime did not begin when the wealthy person decided to sleep. The bedroom had to be prepared in advance. Fires needed attention, water needed to be heated, curtains needed to be arranged, bedding had to be checked, candles or lamps had to be available, clothing for the next day might need to be laid out. The room had to be made ready before the occupant arrived. The apparent simplicity of the final moment, when someone climbed into bed and closed the curtains, depended on many earlier tasks. There was also the question of drafts. Victorian homes were not necessarily airtight. Large windows, fireplaces, doors, and construction methods could allow air to move through the building. Some drafts were welcomed in summer, but in winter they could be uncomfortable. Heavy curtains, rugs, upholstered furniture, and screens could help reduce the effect. A bedroom screen might be placed near a door or fireplace to block cold air, or create privacy while dressing. These objects were functional as well as decorative. The fireplace was the heart of the winter bedroom, but it demanded respect. Fire was essential for warmth. Yet it also represented one of the greatest dangers in a home filled with fabric, wood, curtains, paper, and furniture. An unattended candle could be disastrous. A poorly managed fire could cause smoke or dangerous gases. Household staff therefore had responsibilities that modern heating systems have removed from our daily lives. The nighttime comfort of the family depended on someone understanding how to maintain the fire safely. The chimney itself could create noises that would be unforgettable to someone unfamiliar with the building. Wind passing through a chimney can produce deep, hollow sounds. In a huge mansion, multiple fireplaces and chimneys could create different noises depending on the weather. On a windy night, the house might seem to groan from within. The Victorian fascination with haunted houses becomes easier to understand when you imagine living in such a building without modern explanations for every sound. The attic could add another layer of mystery. Many large houses had attic rooms, storage spaces, servants' quarters, trunks, old furniture, and objects that were rarely used. At night, these areas were dark and largely empty. The sound of something moving overhead could be caused by an animal or shifting structure. But a person lying in bed might have no way of knowing. Large mansions naturally encouraged stories. Every family probably had its own collection of strange noises, unexplained events, old rooms, or peculiar corners. Yet not every night was frightening. In fact, many nights could be deeply peaceful. Imagine a summer evening in an English country mansion. The windows are open, the garden outside, the curtains move slightly in the breeze. Somewhere far away, an owl calls. The house has settled down after dinner. There is no traffic rushing past the windows, no television playing downstairs, and no bright artificial glow covering the landscape. The darkness outside is enormous. The silence is not empty. It is filled with small, natural sounds. For someone accustomed to modern life, this kind of darkness might initially feel uncomfortable, but after a while, it could become calming. Without constant notifications and entertainment, there were fewer things competing for attention. Reading a book by candlelight, listening to rain, or simply lying beneath heavy blankets could occupy the evening. The bedroom could become a place of genuine separation from the outside world. Books were particularly important. Wealthy Victorian bedrooms might contain books, magazines, newspapers, letters, or personal writing materials. Reading before sleep was a common form of evening entertainment for people who had access to books. A person could sit upright against pillows, hold a book near the candle or lamp, and read until tired. But reading in bed by candlelight required care. The flame needed to be positioned properly, and eventually the light had to be extinguished before sleep. Letters could also be part of the bedroom routine. Victorian society relied heavily on written correspondence. There was another curious reality of sleeping in a Victorian mansion that becomes easy to overlook when we focus only on beautiful four-poster beds and candlelit rooms. The bedroom was often a place of constant preparation. The appearance of calm depended on a remarkable amount of activity happening before and after the occupant ever entered the room. A wealthy person could walk into a bedroom at night and see everything apparently ready for sleep. But behind that peaceful scene was a chain of small tasks performed by servants throughout the day. The fire had been prepared, the room cleaned, the bed made, the curtains arranged, the washing water brought up, the nightclothes placed where they could be reached, and the lighting equipment checked. Even the simplest details could require time and labour. In a modern home, many of these things happen almost invisibly because machines and infrastructure handle them. In a Victorian mansion, people handled them. The bed itself could be an enormous object, sometimes so tall and imposing that climbing into it felt more like entering a piece of architecture than lying down on a mattress. High bedsteads could make getting in and out slightly awkward, particularly for children or older people. A small step or footstool might be useful. Once inside, however, the height could provide a feeling of separation from the floor and the rest of the room. The sleeper was surrounded by bedding, curtains, wooden posts, and darkness. The bed became its own little world. For wealthy families, the quality of the bedding could be impressive. Fine linen sheets were valuable possessions, and the softness of good fabric would have been a sign of status. Blankets and quilts could be layered according to the season. Feather-filled bedding could provide warmth and softness, while wool blankets offered insulation during colder months. Yet even expensive bedding could feel heavy compared with modern lightweight materials. If you woke during the night, shifting underneath several thick layers might require considerable effort. The weight of the bedding could also affect the atmosphere. Instead of the light, breathable comfort many people expect today, Victorian winter beds could feel almost enclosed. Heavy blankets trapped body heat, while bed curtains reduced drafts. For some people, this would have been extremely comfortable. For others, especially during warmer weather, it could feel restrictive. Sleeping was partly an exercise in finding the right balance between warmth and ventilation. The mattress itself was also different from the highly engineered mattresses of today. Natural materials such as horsehair, wool, cotton, feathers, and other fillings were used in various types of bedding. The feel could vary considerably depending on construction, quality, and maintenance. A mattress might become uneven over time and require turning or adjustment. Servants could be responsible for this work, ensuring that the bed remained as comfortable as possible. One thing that would immediately seem strange to a modern visitor was the absence of a convenient bedside table filled with electronic devices. There might be a small table or stand, but its contents would be practical rather than digital. A candle or lamp, perhaps a clock, a book, a glass or jug of water, and personal items might sit nearby. The bedroom was not a command center connected to the entire world. Once the door closed, communication with everyone outside the house became slower and more deliberate. If you wanted to know what was happening beyond the mansion, you could not simply pick up a phone. You would wait until morning, speak to another person, read a newspaper, or receive a letter. This meant that the bedroom could become a place of genuine disconnection. There was no constant stream of messages demanding attention. No one could instantly send an image across the world. No notification could suddenly illuminate the darkness and announce that someone wanted your attention. Yet communication within the mansion could still be remarkably organized. Bells were often used to summon servants. A person might pull a bell cord near the bed or elsewhere in the room, producing a signal that indicated assistance was required. In a large household, this system allowed family members to request help without walking through the house themselves. The bell could signal a servant to bring water, adjust a fire, assist with clothing, or perform another task. From the perspective of the person lying comfortably in bed, it was incredibly convenient. From the perspective of the servant, it meant that a quiet night could be interrupted by another request. The existence of servant bells reveals something important about Victorian bedrooms. They were private, but they were not necessarily independent. The wealthy person's ability to remain in bed while another person performed a task was itself a symbol of status. The more prosperous the household, the more elaborate the system of service could become. The bedroom was therefore a place where class differences were visible, even in the smallest routines. Imagine waking before dawn and realizing you are thirsty today. You might keep a bottle beside the bed. In a wealthy Victorian bedroom, there could be a jug and glass available. But if you needed something else, you might use the bell. Within minutes, a servant could appear. The interaction might be brief and formal. There was no need for the occupant to walk downstairs, find the kitchen, heat water, or prepare anything personally. The convenience was remarkable, but it also meant that someone else's sleep or work could be affected by your request. Servants themselves experienced nighttime very differently. They could not simply retreat into their bedrooms and ignore the household. Their working day might begin early and end late, with responsibilities continuing after the family had gone to bed. A maid might need to prepare rooms for guests. A housekeeper could remain responsible for household organization. A valet might prepare clothing for the following morning. Kitchen staff could continue cleaning after dinner. The mansion could therefore contain people who were still working while others were asleep. This creates a strange picture of Victorian luxury. The grand bedroom appears peaceful because someone else has absorbed the inconvenience. The fire is warm because someone carried the fuel. The water is hot because someone heated it. The clothing is ready because someone prepared it. The room is clean because someone cleaned it. The bed is comfortable because someone maintained it. The quietness itself can even be the product of careful labor. The social hierarchy could continue even in the arrangement of bedrooms. The master and mistress of the house might occupy the most desirable rooms, while children, guests, and servants were assigned other areas. Servants' bedrooms could be smaller, less heated, and less private. In some mansions, staff quarters were deliberately separated from family spaces. This separation was not merely practical. It reinforced the social order that defined Victorian household life. A visitor staying at a mansion might have experienced an especially unusual form of sleep. The guest bedroom would be carefully prepared before arrival, but the guest might not know the layout of the house. At night, unfamiliar corridors and stairs could become confusing. A person waking to use the bathroom or chamber pot might struggle to find their way back to the room. Without electric lighting, navigating an unfamiliar mansion after midnight required caution. The guest bedroom itself might contain instructions or arrangements that were obvious to the household but unfamiliar to outsiders. A bell could be present, along with water, towels, toiletries, and perhaps a fireplace. Servants might check the room before bedtime. The guest could feel pampered, but also aware that they were participating in a formal system of hospitality. The concept of privacy was also changing during the Victorian period. As middle-class homes became more comfortable and private spaces became increasingly important, the bedroom became associated with personal identity. A person's bedroom could contain photographs, letters, books, clothing, ornaments, religious objects, souvenirs, and other belongings. For wealthy individuals, it could become a reflection of personality and status. But even a private bedroom could remain connected to expectations about behavior. Victorian society was highly conscious of respectability. The way a bedroom was arranged, the type of furniture it contained, and even the manner in which someone appeared in the morning could be influenced by social conventions. The bedroom was private, but the person who occupied it still belonged to a highly structured social world. Morning dressing could take considerable time. A gentleman might have his clothing laid out in a particular order. A lady might require assistance with garments and hair. The transition from sleeping to being socially present was therefore not instantaneous. There was a ritual between the private person in bed and the public person who would later appear at breakfast or in the drawing room. For children, the boundary between sleeping and waking could be controlled by nannies and nurses. A nursery might follow a strict timetable, with children expected to sleep, wake, eat, study, and play according to household rules. A child's bedroom was not necessarily a place where they could decide their own schedule. Bedtime was part of education and discipline. Children could also be kept away from adult bedrooms. In wealthy families, nurseries were often separate spaces where children were cared for by nurses and governesses. This meant that a child might grow up in the same enormous house as their parents, while having limited access to them at night. There was something else about Victorian bedrooms that modern visitors might find surprisingly intimate. The room was often filled with objects connected to everyday life. A bedroom was not necessarily a carefully simplified sleeping space. It could be a dressing room, sitting room, writing room, storage area, and personal retreat all at once. A wealthy person's bedroom might contain chairs positioned near the fireplace, a small table for writing, a dressing table covered with personal items, wardrobes filled with clothing, trunks beneath furniture, books stacked beside the bed, and photographs of family members. The room could tell you almost everything about the person who lived there. Their interests, relationships, habits, wealth, and even anxieties could be visible in the objects surrounding the bed. Photographs were especially meaningful in Victorian homes. Family photographs might sit in frames on tables or cabinets, showing relatives in formal poses. Some bedrooms could contain portraits of parents, children, spouses, or ancestors. In the weak light of a candle, these faces would have looked very different from the bright photographs we see today. They might appear serious, distant, and almost ghostly. Victorian photography often required people to remain still for long exposures, so expressions could seem unusually solemn. Imagine waking in the middle of the night, lighting a candle, and seeing a row of serious faces staring back from the darkness. The bedroom could also contain flowers. Fresh flowers were popular decorative elements, particularly in wealthy homes, although keeping them fresh required regular attention. Their scent could add another dimension to the room. A vase beside the window might carry roses, lilies, violets, or seasonal flowers from the garden. During the day, they made the room feel elegant. At night, their scent might become more noticeable in the still air. The garden itself could influence the bedroom. A country mansion surrounded by gardens and trees had a relationship with nature that modern urban homes often lack. Windows opened directly onto the sounds and smells of the outdoors. Rain could be heard clearly. Birds could wake the household. Wind could move branches against windows. Insects could gather around lights. In autumn, leaves might scrape against glass or roofs. In winter, snow could absorb sound and make the entire estate unusually quiet. The absence of modern noise could be both peaceful and unsettling. A person who had spent the evening at a formal dinner might return to a bedroom where the only sound was the fire. The silence could feel enormous. Today, silence is often interrupted by appliances, traffic, distant conversations, or electronic devices. In a Victorian mansion, the silence could be deep enough to make a person's own breathing noticeable. This could change the way time felt. Without constant stimulation, 5 minutes could seem much longer. Waiting for sleep might feel different when there was nothing to scroll through, nothing to watch, and no endless stream of information to consume. You could read, think, pray, write. The darkness itself became part of the nighttime routine. Religion also influenced bedtime for many Victorian people. Prayer could be part of the evening routine, particularly in households where religious practice was important. A person might kneel beside the bed or sit quietly before retiring. Family prayers could also occur elsewhere in the house. The boundary between religious practice and ordinary domestic life was often much closer than it is in many modern households. For some families, bedtime was therefore associated with reflection and ritual. The day was reviewed, prayers were said, and the person prepared mentally for sleep. This did not guarantee peaceful nights, of course. People still worried, dreamed, woke, and struggled to sleep, but the routine itself could create a sense of structure. Dreams were another part of Victorian nighttime culture. The 19th century was fascinated by dreams, supernatural experiences, spiritualism, and questions about the mind. A strange dream could become a topic of conversation or interpretation. Victorian society also had a strong interest in omens, symbolism, and unexplained experiences. In a dark mansion, the boundary between an ordinary dream and something mysterious could feel especially thin. Imagine waking after a vivid dream. The fire has almost gone out. The room is cold. You are not sure what time it is. The curtains hide the windows, so there is no natural light to tell you whether dawn is near. You sit quietly and try to remember the dream. A clock strikes somewhere downstairs. Suddenly, the ordinary house feels mysterious again. The Victorian fascination with spiritualism adds another layer to the nighttime atmosphere. Seances, ghost stories, mysterious photographs, and reports of supernatural encounters were popular subjects in the period. Not everyone believed in such things, of course, but the cultural fascination was widespread. In a mansion with dark corridors and candlelit bedrooms, the imagination had plenty of material to work with. Large portraits could seem especially unsettling. A painting of an ancestor might hang in a corridor outside the bedroom. During the day, it would be an ordinary decorative object. At night, illuminated briefly by a candle, the eyes of the painted figure could seem to follow you. This is not evidence of anything supernatural. It is simply the way human perception responds to faces and shadows. But in a society already fascinated by ghosts, such experiences could easily become stories. The architecture of a mansion could also produce unexpected changes in temperature. Some rooms might be warmer because they were closer to kitchens or fireplaces, while others remained cold. Corridors could act like channels for moving air. Staircases could carry warmth upward or cold downward. A bedroom at the end of a long hallway might be noticeably different from one near the center of the house. This meant that choosing a bedroom could matter enormously. The best rooms were often desirable, not only because they were beautiful, but because they were comfortable. A room with good sunlight, pleasant views, a reliable fireplace, and convenient access to bathrooms or dressing areas could be highly valued. Guests might receive rooms based partly on status and partly on availability. Windows were especially important. Large windows allowed natural light into bedrooms during the day, but they could also create problems at night. Glass technology had improved substantially by the Victorian period, but windows could still allow drafts. Curtains became essential for privacy, warmth, and light control. Heavy drapes could transform a bright bedroom into a dark, enclosed space within seconds. Privacy itself was a complicated subject. A mansion might contain dozens of rooms, but people still had to navigate shared spaces. A bedroom could provide a retreat, but servants might enter to perform their duties. Family members could knock. Children might need attention. Guests could arrive unexpectedly. The wealthy person was surrounded by people even while enjoying apparent privacy. The relationship between the master bedroom and servants was particularly interesting. A maid might enter in the morning to open curtains and prepare the room. A valet could assist a gentleman with clothing. A lady's maid could help with hair and dressing. A housemaid might return later to clean. The bedroom was therefore a workplace for servants, even though it was a private space for the family. This meant servants had to become extremely skilled at moving quietly. In a formal household, discretion was important. A good servant was expected to perform tasks efficiently without unnecessarily disturbing the family. Footsteps, doors, and conversations were controlled. The quietness of the mansion was partly a product of this discipline, but the servant's bedroom could be very different. A maid might share a room with another servant. The space could be small and simply furnished. Heating might be limited. The mattress and bedding might be less expensive. There might be little privacy. The contrast between the grand family bedroom and the servants' sleeping quarters revealed the economic structure of the household. In some houses, servants' rooms were positioned close to their work areas. A maid might sleep near the bedrooms she was responsible for. A cook would need to be close to the kitchen. This arrangement reduced the time required to respond to requests. It also meant that servants could be awakened by household activity at almost any hour. The mansion, therefore, operated on multiple schedules simultaneously. The family might be sleeping while servants were preparing breakfast. A night watchman might be awake while everyone else rested. Horses could require attention. Kitchen staff might clean late. A child might wake and need a nurse. A sick family member could require constant care. There was no single moment when the entire building was completely inactive. This makes the phrase, "the mansion went to sleep," slightly misleading. It never truly did. Even after the last guests left the drawing room and the final candles were extinguished, the house continued functioning. Fires needed attention, doors needed to be secured, animals needed care, servants had their own routines. The building itself produced sounds as materials expanded and contracted. Wood was particularly expressive at night. Wooden floors, beams, doors, and furniture could shift with changes in temperature and humidity. A floorboard might creak without anyone stepping on it. A door could move slightly in a draft. Furniture could make a faint cracking sound. To someone unfamiliar with the building, these noises could be surprisingly loud. There was yet another side to sleeping in a Victorian mansion that would become apparent only after the first few nights. The experience depended enormously on whether you were a member of the family, a guest, a child, or one of the people employed to keep the house running. The same building could contain completely different worlds of sleep separated by only a few floors. The person sleeping in a grand bedroom might have thick curtains, a large fireplace, fine linen, and several blankets, while a servant sleeping elsewhere in the mansion could have a much smaller room and a far simpler bed. The mansion was one building, but nighttime was experienced according to where you stood within its social hierarchy. For the head of the household, the bedroom could represent authority. It was often one of the most carefully maintained rooms, and the routines surrounding it could be extremely formal. A servant might prepare the room in advance, ensure the fire was burning, arrange the bedding, and make sure everything required for the evening was available. The occupant could then enter, remove the formal clothing of the day, and gradually withdraw from the social world. The moment the bedroom door closed could feel like crossing a boundary. Beyond the door was the mansion's public world where guests were entertained, meals were served, and social rules governed behaviour. Inside was a more private world of dressing, reading, conversation, and sleep. Yet even this privacy had limits because servants could still enter when required. A wealthy person might become accustomed to hearing a quiet knock before a servant entered. The servant would wait for permission, perform the necessary task, and leave. The interaction could be so routine that it barely registered. But for a modern person, having someone else enter the bedroom to perform ordinary tasks might feel remarkably intrusive. The distinction becomes even clearer in the morning. Today, waking usually means reaching for an alarm, opening curtains, checking the time, and getting up. In a wealthy Victorian household, waking could be part of a sequence controlled by other people. A servant might enter with water, open curtains, revive the fire, prepare clothing, or announce that breakfast was ready. The person in bed was not necessarily responsible for initiating every part of the morning. This could create a strange sense of luxury. Imagine waking slowly beneath warm blankets while someone else has already prepared the room. The curtains open, morning light enters. A fire has been restored. Warm water is available. Clothing is waiting. Breakfast will soon arrive. You do not need to begin the day's physical work yourself. But the other side of that luxury was dependence. The system worked only because other people were constantly working. If servants were sick, absent, overworked, or unable to complete their duties, the family's comfort could immediately be affected. This is why large Victorian houses required such elaborate staffing systems. A mansion was not simply a large private home. It could function almost like a small institution. There were people responsible for cooking, cleaning, laundry, gardening, horses, maintenance, personal service, and household management. Their work continued across the day and sometimes into the night. The bedroom was connected to all of them. The clean sheet came from the laundry. The hot water came from the kitchen or heating system. The fire depended on fuel and maintenance. The clothing came from wardrobes managed by servants. The polished furniture required cleaning. The curtains and carpets required care. The room's apparent stillness was therefore the visible result of continuous movement elsewhere. A Victorian mansion could even have its own vocabulary of nighttime sounds. The kitchen might produce faint metallic noises as dishes were washed. A servant's bell might ring unexpectedly. A door could close downstairs. A carriage might arrive outside. A horse might stamp in its stable. A clock might strike. The house itself might creak as its materials responded to temperature. Once you lived there long enough, these sounds would become familiar. You would learn which creak belonged to which staircase and which door tended to rattle in the wind. You might know that the clock in the entrance hall struck slightly louder than the one in the library. You might recognize the sound of a servant walking down a particular corridor. In this sense, people developed a relationship with the sounds of their houses. The mansion became a kind of enormous acoustic environment. Nighttime revealed parts of the building that were invisible during the day. This could be particularly noticeable during storms. A Victorian mansion could sound almost alive during severe weather. Wind might rush around the chimneys. Rain could strike the windows and roof. Wooden doors might shake slightly. Loose shutters could move. The sound of water could travel through gutters and pipes. For someone lying in a large bedroom, the storm might feel distant and immediate at the same time. The thick walls provided protection, but every sound reminded you that the outside world was still there. Lightning could make the experience even more dramatic. A sudden flash could illuminate the entire bedroom through the curtains, followed seconds later by thunder. In a world without electric streetlights, a stormy night could alternate between deep darkness and sudden bursts of natural light. People also had to think more carefully about candles during storms. If the wind entered through an open window, a flame could flicker dangerously. A candle might need to be moved or protected. A lamp could require adjustment. The simple act of keeping a room illuminated demanded attention. And if the storm caused a power failure today, we would reach for a flashlight in a Victorian mansion. If a gas or electrical system failed, the household might return to candles. The darkness would not merely be inconvenient, it could change the entire operation of the house. This highlights how new electricity really was. We tend to imagine the Victorian period as uniformly candlelit, but the later 19th century was a period of rapid technological change. Some wealthy homes adopted gas lighting and later electricity. Others remained dependent on candles and oil lamps. The exact experience depended heavily on when and where the mansion existed. A late Victorian bedroom might therefore have a combination of old and new technologies. There could be an electric light overhead, but still a fireplace for warmth. There might be running water, but servants still carrying out much of the household work. A telephone might connect the mansion to the outside world, but letters would remain important. The bedroom became one of the places where this transition was most visible. Electric light changed nighttime dramatically because it removed one of the greatest limitations of older homes, darkness. A room could suddenly be illuminated evenly. Reading became easier, dressing became easier, servants could work more safely, corridors could remain lit. But the introduction of electricity did not instantly create modern sleep habits. People still used heavy curtains. They still slept in large beds. They still depended on fireplaces or other heating systems. They still had servants. They still lived according to Victorian social conventions. Technology changed the tools, but culture changed more slowly. The same was true of heating. Some wealthy mansions experimented with central heating systems, but fireplaces remained extremely important. A fireplace was not simply a source of heat. It was a social and visual feature of the room. people sat near it. Furniture was arranged around it. It provided light and warmth. Its presence made the bedroom feel inhabited. On cold nights, the fireplace could become the center of the room. A person might sit in a chair beside it before getting into bed, reading. Once they retired, the fire continued to glow. The warmth reached the bed unevenly, creating warmer and colder zones within the room. The location of the bed therefore mattered. A bed positioned too close to the fireplace could become uncomfortably warm. Too far away, and the sleeper might feel cold. Curtains and screens could help control airflow. The bedroom's orientation mattered too. A room facing south or receiving strong afternoon sunlight could behave differently from one facing north. Windows overlooking gardens might receive more natural light, while rooms facing walls or courtyards could remain darker. The Victorian mansion was therefore an environment of small physical differences. Modern climate control has reduced many of these variations. In a historic house, one room could feel completely different from another. This was especially important for sleep because temperature affects comfort. A person could wake because the room became too cold or too warm. Bedding had to compensate in winter. Additional blankets might be added. In summer, servants could be responsible for these adjustments. A household member might request another blanket or ask for the fire to be changed. The servant's job was partly to anticipate such needs. The idea of anticipation was central to domestic service. The best servant was not merely someone who obeyed instructions. They were expected to understand the household's routines and prepare things before being asked. If a family member liked a particular room warmer, preferred certain bedding, or required a specific morning routine, servants learned these preferences. This meant that the bedroom could contain an extraordinary amount of invisible information. A servant might know exactly how a particular person liked their curtains arranged, how much fire they preferred, what time they usually woke. There was also something wonderfully strange about the first few minutes after entering a Victorian bedroom at night. The room would not immediately feel like a place designed for sleep. It might feel more like a carefully arranged world waiting for its final ritual. The bed would be turned down, the curtains partially closed, the fireplace glowing, and perhaps a small lamp would illuminate the dressing table. Everything would be arranged with such precision that it could almost seem as though the room had been waiting for you. But the moment you began removing the day's clothing, the character of the room would change. The formal world of dinner, visitors, conversations, and social obligations would gradually disappear. The expensive dress, coat, shoes, jewelry, and accessories of the day would be replaced by loose nightclothes. Hair would be brushed and arranged. Watches and jewelry would be removed. Letters might be placed inside drawers. The person who had spent the evening being seen by others could finally disappear behind a closed bedroom door. For someone wealthy enough to have a personal maid or valet, this process could be almost entirely assisted. A maid could help with clothing, hair, and personal items, while a valet could prepare a gentleman's garments and belongings for the following day. This meant that even the transition into sleep could be a social interaction. You might be tired, but another person was still working beside you. Eventually, however, the servant would leave, and the bedroom would finally become private. That moment of departure could be particularly important. The door would close, and suddenly the room would feel different. The servant's footsteps would fade down the corridor. The sound of the rest of the mansion would become distant. For the first time that day, there might be no one watching you, speaking to you, or expecting anything from you. You could sit quietly beside the fire and simply exist. The fireplace would be especially comforting at this stage. Victorian bedrooms were often arranged so that a chair or small sitting area faced the fire. Before getting into bed, a person might sit there and read for a while. The fire provided warmth and light, and the room's atmosphere could become remarkably intimate. The rest of the mansion might already be dark, but the bedroom would still have a small circle of life around the flames. If you were reading, the choice of book could say something about the person who lived there. Novels were enormously popular, as were newspapers, magazines, religious works, histories, poetry, and personal letters. A wealthy person could have a substantial private library elsewhere in the mansion, but a few favourite books might remain in the bedroom. Reading before bed allowed the person to move gradually from the social world into a quieter state of mind. The newspaper could be especially interesting. A Victorian newspaper contained reports about politics, business, crime, society, foreign events, advertisements, shipping, railway schedules, and countless other subjects. A person might read the day's news before sleeping, just as people today check their phones, but the experience was fundamentally different because the information was fixed on paper. There was no endless stream of updates. The day's news had already been printed. Anything that happened after publication would have to wait until the next edition. A letter was even more personal. If a letter arrived that evening, the recipient might take it upstairs and read it alone. The bedroom could become the place where important private information was absorbed. A proposal, family problem, business concern, invitation, apology, or piece of news could arrive in an envelope and alter the mood of the entire evening. Unlike a modern message that can be answered immediately, a Victorian letter carried the weight of distance and waiting. Someone might read the same letter several times before going to sleep. They might fold it carefully. They might place it beneath another letter. They might write a response later. The bedroom therefore held not only sleep but anticipation. There was also the possibility of keeping a diary. Victorian diaries could record ordinary events that seem surprisingly intimate today. A person might write about visitors, weather, meals, arguments, illness, travel, clothing, books, or family concerns. Some entries could be brief, while others might become extensive reflections. Writing by lamplight in a private bedroom created a rare opportunity to record thoughts that were never intended for public view. The physical act of writing was different too. There were no keyboards. A person had to prepare paper, ink, and a pen. The writing desk might be positioned near the best available light. If the room was cold, the writer might sit close to the fireplace. Ink could behave differently depending on temperature. Papers had to be handled carefully. A letter could not simply be deleted and rewritten instantly. This slower process encouraged deliberate writing. Every sentence required physical effort. Mistakes were inconvenient. The page itself became valuable. The bedroom could therefore be a place where the day's thoughts were preserved. Once the writing ended, the paper might be folded and stored. The ink would dry, the lamp would be extinguished, the room would become quiet again. Another overlooked aspect of Victorian sleeping was the preparation of the bed itself. Turning down a bed was more than simply folding a blanket. Servants could arrange multiple layers of bedding, position pillows, check the sheets, and make sure the bed was ready. In colder weather, a warming device could be used to heat the sheets before the occupant entered. Bed warmers were particularly useful because the room itself could be cold even when the bed was comfortable. A metal pan filled with hot coals or another heating device could be moved beneath the blankets. The servant had to use it carefully because excessive heat or a misplaced hot object could damage bedding or create a fire hazard. The idea of entering a warm bed after spending the evening in a cold house would have been enormously appealing. The first contact with the heated sheets could provide an immediate sense of comfort, but the warmth would gradually fade, leaving the sleeper dependent on body heat and blankets. Some wealthy households could use hot water bottles or similar devices as technology developed. These offered another way to create localized warmth. Yet the underlying principle remained the same. Warmth had to be deliberately created. Modern people rarely think about the process of warming a bed. We simply get in. The Victorian sleeper might have experienced warmth as something that had been prepared for them. That preparation itself could make the bed feel luxurious. The sensation of slipping beneath warm blankets after a cold evening would be one of the most memorable parts of winter, but summer had an entirely different character. Heavy bedding could become uncomfortable. The fireplace would be unnecessary or reduced. Windows might be opened. Curtains could be arranged to allow airflow. The sounds of insects would become noticeable. The room might remain warm long after sunset. A large Victorian mansion could have thick walls that helped moderate temperature, but upper floors could still become hot. Without air conditioning, people had limited options. A hand fan could provide some relief. Windows could be opened. Lightweight bedding could be used. The same bedroom that felt wonderfully warm in January might be unpleasant in July. This seasonal contrast would have been part of everyday life. People did not expect indoor environments to remain at a fixed temperature all year. Instead, they adapted. Winter meant layers. Summer meant ventilation. Spring meant changing routines. Autumn meant preparing for cold. The house itself became a calendar. Even the smell of the mansion changed with the seasons. Winter brought smoke and coal. Summer brought flowers, open air, and perhaps damp earth after rain. Spring brought fresh vegetation. Autumn brought leaves and cooler air. Sleeping therefore involved a constant awareness of the world outside. Another major difference was the quality of darkness. In a country mansion far from a city, the night could be extraordinarily dark. Even after your eyes adjusted, the room might contain only faint outlines. If clouds covered the moon, the window might become completely black. This could make the first light of dawn feel almost miraculous. At first, the room would remain dark. Then the curtains would begin to show a faint grey edge. The window would slowly become visible. Furniture would reappear. The walls would regain their colour. The fire would seem less important. Eventually, birds would begin singing. Morning had arrived. Without an alarm clock announcing the exact minute, natural light and household sounds became important signals. A servant might know when to begin waking family members. The kitchen might begin producing sounds. The stable could become active. The household's morning machinery would slowly start. This gradual transition could be much less abrupt than modern waking. There was no sudden electronic alarm screaming beside the pillow. Instead, morning could approach slowly. The house woke first. Then the people woke with it. This rhythm was especially noticeable in country houses, where the surrounding estate followed natural cycles. Horses needed feeding. Gardens needed attention. Farm work began. Birds became active. Sunlight entered the rooms. The mansion's morning was therefore connected to the land around it. At night, that land disappeared into darkness. In the morning it returned. The bedroom window provided the connection. This relationship with nature also influenced sleep itself. But there was one more thing that made nighttime in a Victorian mansion different from almost any modern sleeping experience. The house had a memory. Not a supernatural memory, but a physical one. Every room carried evidence of the people who had lived there before. The bedroom might contain furniture that had belonged to an earlier generation, paintings inherited from relatives, old letters tucked away in drawers, family portraits, worn carpets and objects that had been used for decades. A person could lie in the same bed where a parent had once slept, beneath the same ceiling where previous generations had watched the seasons change. The bedroom was therefore not just a private space for the present occupant. It was part of a long chain of family history. This could make bedtime surprisingly reflective. A person might look at an old portrait before extinguishing the candle and think about someone who had died years earlier. A piece of furniture might remind them of childhood. A particular room might be associated with a wedding, an illness, the birth of a child, or the death of a relative. In a large family mansion, memories could be attached to almost every corridor. The house was also filled with routines that could remain unchanged for generations. A certain servant might always knock twice before entering. A particular bedroom might always be warmed before the occupant retired. Breakfast might always be served at the same hour. Curtains might be opened according to a familiar routine. The family could become deeply accustomed to these patterns. When something changed, it might immediately feel unusual. Imagine, for example, that the clock in the hallway suddenly stopped. The silence would be noticeable because the household had become accustomed to hearing it, or perhaps a familiar servant was absent because of illness. The morning might feel strangely disorganized. A fire might burn differently because a new person had prepared it. A bedroom might feel colder because a window had been left open. These small changes could remind everyone how much the household depended on routine. The mansion was therefore a place where repetition created comfort. The same bed, the same curtains, the same fireplace, the same clock, and the same morning sounds could create a powerful sense of familiarity. The house did not need to be perfect to feel safe. It simply needed to behave in the expected way. This may explain why people who lived in historic homes often developed strong emotional attachments to individual rooms. A bedroom could become associated years later. Simply remembering the room might bring back the sensation of the cold air, the smell of the fireplace, or the sound of the clock. The Victorian mansion also had a very different relationship with personal space. Today, people often think of a bedroom as a place where they can completely shut themselves away. A locked door can create a strong boundary. In a Victorian household, that boundary existed, but it was more flexible. Servants could enter. Family members might knock. Children could be called. Household responsibilities could interrupt. Privacy existed within the larger structure of the home for an upper-class woman. The bedroom might nevertheless be one of the few spaces where she could exercise considerable personal control. Her clothing, letters, books, jewelry, photographs, and personal possessions could all be arranged according to her preferences. A dressing table could become almost a private command center. Drawers could contain letters that no one else was supposed to read. Jewelry boxes could hold sentimental objects. A writing desk could become the place where private thoughts were recorded. The room could therefore contain a hidden life beneath the formal appearance of Victorian society. A woman might spend the day surrounded by visitors, relatives, servants, and social expectations, then retreat to her bedroom at night, and finally become completely herself. She could remove the clothing that represented her public identity, let down her hair, read a private letter, write in a diary, and sit quietly by the fire. The bedroom could become a refuge. The same could be true for a gentleman returning from business or social obligations. His bedroom could be the place where he escaped formal conversation. He might read, write letters, examine documents, or simply sit alone. This is one reason bedrooms became increasingly important in 19th century domestic culture. As ideas about individuality and privacy developed, personal rooms became more meaningful. A bedroom was no longer simply where a person slept. It was where a person's private identity could exist away from public observation. And yet, the mansion's size meant that solitude could be almost too complete. A person might be physically alone while knowing that other people were sleeping somewhere else in the building. A child might be upstairs in the nursery. A spouse might be in another bedroom. Servants might be in distant quarters. Guests might occupy an entire wing. The mansion created distance within the family. Someone could be only a few rooms away and still feel far away. This was especially important when illness occurred. A sick person could be placed in a separate bedroom to protect others or to provide quiet. A nurse could remain nearby. Family members might visit at certain times. The bedroom could become a controlled environment. In a period when many illnesses were dangerous, the separation could be both practical and emotionally difficult. A person might hear that someone they loved was ill, but not see them immediately. The architecture of the mansion could create physical distance during moments when people wanted closeness. At other times, the mansion provided space for privacy that smaller homes could not. A person could be alone without leaving the house. They could retreat to another room. They could sleep separately. They could entertain privately. The enormous amount of space was one of the greatest luxuries available to the wealthy, but there was also a psychological cost to so much space. Unused rooms required maintenance. Dark corridors had to be navigated. Heating had to be distributed. The house could feel empty when only a few people were present. A mansion filled with hundreds of rooms could contain surprisingly little human activity after midnight. This could make the house feel almost abandoned. The sensation would be particularly strong if the family was away. A mansion without its occupants could become incredibly quiet. Servants might remain, but the normal social energy would disappear. Rooms would be closed, fires would be reduced, corridors would become empty. Even when the family was present, certain parts of the house might remain unused for long periods. A guest wing could stay empty for weeks. A formal bedroom might be closed until visitors arrived. An upper floor might contain storage rooms and servants' quarters rarely visited by the family. The mansion therefore contained spaces with different levels of life. Some rooms were constantly active. Some were occasionally used. Some were almost forgotten. At night, all of these differences became more pronounced. A bedroom near the main family rooms might still feel connected to household life. A room at the far end of an unused wing could feel isolated. The choice of bedroom could therefore influence the emotional experience. A guest might prefer a room closer to the main staircase because it felt more connected. Another person might prefer a distant room because it offered privacy. A child might dislike a room at the end of a corridor because it felt too far from everyone else. A servant might prefer a room near colleagues. The mansion's architecture shaped these preferences. Another important factor was the presence of servants during the night. In a wealthy household, people were rarely completely responsible for their own safety. Someone might be awake elsewhere. A servant might be stationed near an entrance. A groom could be attending to horses. A watchman might patrol the grounds. Household staff provided a sense of security. This was particularly important before modern security systems. There were no electronic alarms, motion sensors, security cameras, or automated locks. Physical locks, dogs, servants, watchmen, gates, and awareness of the surroundings provided security. A country mansion could have large grounds that needed protection. Gates might be closed at night. Doors were secured. Windows could be checked. Dogs could react to unusual sounds. The nighttime security routine could therefore be part of the household's preparation for sleep. Before everyone retired, doors were checked, gates were secured, fires were inspected, lights were extinguished. The house was prepared for the night. The process could be formal enough that everyone knew what was expected. Once the mansion was secured, the family could sleep with greater confidence. But the presence of security staff also meant that the house never completely surrendered to sleep. Someone remained responsible for watching. This became particularly important during winter storms or other emergencies. A large estate could have extensive grounds, stables, greenhouses, barns, and outbuildings. The people responsible for them might need to work at night. The family bedroom therefore existed at the center of a much larger nighttime landscape. Beyond the walls, workers could be awake, horses could require attention, dogs could bark, farm animals could make sounds. Wind could move through trees. The mansion might be quiet, but the estate was not necessarily silent. This could be especially noticeable in rural areas. The countryside has its own nighttime sounds. One of the most fascinating things about sleeping in a Victorian mansion was the way bedtime could make the house feel almost like a completely different place. During the afternoon, a grand mansion could be bright, busy, and impressive. Sunlight would enter through tall windows, servants would move through corridors, visitors might arrive at the front entrance, and the sound of conversation could fill the drawing rooms. By midnight, almost all of that had disappeared. The same staircase that had been crowded earlier could now be empty. The same hallway that looked elegant in daylight could appear strangely long in the darkness. Furniture that seemed ordinary during the afternoon could become mysterious shapes at night. The mansion had not changed, but the absence of light transformed it. This transformation was especially powerful because Victorian houses were often designed with dramatic interiors, high ceilings, elaborate wallpaper, dark wooden furniture, heavy curtains, ornate mirrors, carved fireplaces, paintings, and decorative objects created an enormous amount of visual detail. During the day, all of this could be admired. At night, a candle revealed only a fraction of it. The rest disappeared into shadow. If you woke suddenly, you might not immediately recognize the room around you. Your eyes would search for familiar shapes while your mind slowly reconstructed where you were. The first sensation might be the weight of the blankets. Victorian bedding could be substantial, especially during winter. There might be several layers covering the body, and the bed itself could feel like a warm enclosure. The pillow might be filled with feathers or another natural material, and the sheets could be made from linen or cotton. The mattress might have a very different feel from the modern mattresses people are accustomed to today. Instead of a precisely engineered surface designed around different sleeping positions, it might be filled with natural materials that compressed and changed over time. A good mattress was valuable, and servants were responsible for maintaining it. The mattress could be turned regularly so that it did not develop uncomfortable depressions. Bedding could be aired to reduce moisture and odors. Pillows could be shaken or adjusted. Sheets were changed according to household standards, available labor, and the period. The wealthy could afford more frequent laundering than poorer households, but cleanliness still required enormous effort. The bed itself could also influence how a person slept. 4 poster beds were not simply decorative. The posts supported curtains that could be drawn around the sleeping area. These curtains created privacy and could reduce drafts. In a large room with high ceilings, the enclosed space around the bed could also feel warmer and more intimate. Once the curtains were closed, the sleeper no longer had to see the entire bedroom. That could be comforting. The bedroom might contain a dozen pieces of furniture, but behind the curtains there was only the bed. The outside world became distant. The mansion's size almost disappeared. The sleeper could feel enclosed in a smaller, warmer space. Yet bed curtains had disadvantages too. They could collect dust, require cleaning, and reduce airflow. In warm weather, a heavily curtained bed could become uncomfortable. The same feature that protected someone from winter drafts could make summer nights stuffy. This constant balancing of comfort and inconvenience was typical of Victorian domestic life. Almost every solution created another problem. A fireplace provided warmth but required fuel and maintenance. Heavy curtains blocked cold air but reduced ventilation. Thick bedding kept people warm but could become too hot. Open windows provided fresh air but admitted insects and noise. Candles provided light but created fire hazards. Modern homes solve many of these problems simultaneously with technology. Victorian homes required compromises. The bedroom was therefore a place where people constantly adjusted their environment. A curtain could be moved, a fire could be changed, a blanket could be added, a window could be opened, a screen could be repositioned, a candle could be moved closer, a servant could be called. Comfort was something that had to be actively created. The fireplace deserves particular attention because it was often the most important source of warmth in the room. A glowing fire could make the bedroom feel cozy and luxurious. The light from the flames moved across the walls and furniture, producing a warm atmosphere that modern electric lights cannot perfectly reproduce. But maintaining the fire was work. Someone had to bring coal or wood. Someone had to build the fire. Someone had to remove ashes. Someone had to clean the grate. Someone had to monitor it. Someone had to make sure it did not become dangerous. If the fire died too quickly, the bedroom became cold. If it burned too strongly, the room could become uncomfortable. The ideal fire required experience. The person sleeping in the room might not have needed to know how to build a fire because servants handled it. But they would certainly notice when the fire was poorly maintained. A cold bedroom could be a reminder that the household system had failed somewhere. The fire also influenced the smell of the room. Burning wood and coal produced odours that could settle into fabrics. A bedroom could have a faint, smoky scent even after the flames had gone out. For people of the period, this was simply part of domestic life. The fireplace could also become the last source of light after the candle was extinguished. A few glowing embers might remain visible in the darkness. Their light would be much weaker than a lamp, but enough to create a faint reddish glow. Imagine lying in bed and looking through a small opening in the curtains. You can see the fireplace across the room. The flames have almost disappeared. Only the embers remain. The rest of the bedroom is black. Every few moments, a small piece of wood shifts and produces a faint crack. Then the clock sounds. The contrast between the warm fire and the enormous darkness would be unmistakable. This kind of nighttime atmosphere could be incredibly peaceful. It could also make a person aware of how physically vulnerable they were. The walls of the mansion provided protection, but the weather outside remained powerful. A storm could shake the windows, snow could block roads, extreme cold could penetrate rooms. The mansion was large, but it was still a building exposed to nature. Country estates made this especially obvious. In a remote Victorian mansion, the nearest neighbouring house might be far away. There might be fields, woods, gardens, stables, and agricultural land surrounding the property. At night, there could be almost no artificial light beyond the estate itself. This meant the stars could be spectacular. If the curtains were opened and the sky was clear, a sleeper might see thousands of stars. The night sky would not be washed out by the glow of modern cities. The Milky Way could be much more obvious. For someone standing at a bedroom window, the sight could be extraordinary. But darkness also meant that the grounds outside became difficult to see. A garden that looked beautiful during the day could become an indistinct black landscape after sunset. Trees became silhouettes, paths disappeared, statues became shadows, ponds became dark patches. The edge of the estate could be impossible to see. This gave country mansions a strong sense of isolation. Inside, there was warmth and human activity. Outside, there was darkness and nature. The bedroom window represented the boundary between those worlds. During storms, this boundary became even more dramatic. Rain could strike the glass. Wind could move trees violently. Lightning could illuminate the grounds for an instant. Thunder could shake the house. A sleeper might wake, listen to the storm, and then slowly returned to sleep. There was no weather app to check, no forecast on a phone, no radar map. The weather was experienced directly. If snow arrived during the night, the morning could reveal an entirely different world. Gardens that had been green or brown the previous evening might be covered in white. Roads could become difficult. Carriages might be delayed. Servants might have to clear paths. The bedroom became a place from which the weather was observed. The window was not simply decorative. It was a connection to the outside world. Victorian people could often tell the season from the room itself. Winter meant cold glass, shorter daylight, heavier blankets and stronger fires. Summer meant open windows, lighter bedding, longer evenings, and more outdoor sounds. Modern climate-controlled homes reduce these differences. The Victorian bedroom did not. This seasonal variation also affected sleep routines. In winter, people could retire earlier because darkness arrived early. In summer, long daylight hours could encourage later activity. Artificial lighting made it possible to extend the evening, but natural light still influenced daily rhythms. A mansion filled with lamps could remain active after sunset, but the experience was different from daylight. The light was localized. One room could be bright while another remained dark. This created zones of activity. The drawing room might glow with lamps. The corridor outside could be dim. The staircase might have only a small light. A servant carrying a candle could create a moving point of brightness. The house was never uniformly illuminated. This uneven lighting was one of the defining features of Victorian nighttime life. If you left the bedroom, you entered a world where visibility changed constantly. Near a lamp, objects were clear. A few steps away, they disappeared into shadow. Corners were difficult to see. Stairs required care. Perhaps the most surprising part of sleeping in a Victorian mansion was how much preparation happened before the sleeper ever touched the bed. The room had to be transformed from a daytime living space into a nighttime sanctuary. Curtains were checked. Lamps were adjusted, fireplaces were inspected, bedding was arranged, water was placed nearby, clothing was prepared, and personal belongings were put away. In a wealthy household, the transition could happen almost invisibly. By the time the occupant entered the room, everything appeared effortless. But the word effortless hides an enormous amount of work. A single bedroom might require attention from several people during the course of a day. Someone cleaned the room. Someone cared for the fireplace. Someone handled the laundry. Someone prepared clothing. Someone carried water. Someone polished furniture. Someone arranged flowers. Someone made sure the room looked presentable. The person who eventually climbed into bed might see only the finished result. This was one of the defining characteristics of life in a great Victorian house. Luxury was often measured by how little effort the wealthy person had to make personally. The more servants a household employed, the more completely everyday inconveniences could be removed from the lives of the family. You did not have to fetch your own water. You did not have to clean your own room. You did not have to prepare your own fire. You did not necessarily have to dress yourself, and you certainly did not have to spend the morning making the bed. Someone else handled these things. For a modern person, this could initially feel like an extraordinary level of comfort. Imagine waking up and knowing that everything you need for the morning has already been prepared. Your clothes are waiting. The room is warm, water is available, the curtains are opened, breakfast is being prepared downstairs. But there was another side. Your private life was constantly intersecting with the work of other people. A servant knew when you went to bed. They knew when you usually woke. They knew what clothes you wore. They knew which room you preferred. They might know your habits better than some members of your family. The bedroom therefore had less privacy than we might assume. A person could close the door, but the household still had access to the room. A maid might enter in the morning. A housemaid might clean during the day. A valet might prepare clothing. A nurse might attend a child. A doctor might visit during illness. The bedroom was private, but not completely private. For some people, this was simply normal. For others, it could be uncomfortable. The distinction between personal and professional space was much less clear than it is today. The servant might be performing a task, but the task was happening inside the most private room of the house. This was especially significant for women. Victorian clothing could require assistance, and personal grooming could be elaborate. A lady's maid might spend considerable time in the bedroom or dressing room. Hair could require careful preparation. Clothing could involve multiple layers, fasteners, corsets, skirts, jackets, and accessories. Going to bed therefore meant undoing the work of getting dressed. The evening clothing was removed piece by piece. Hair was loosened. Jewelry was taken off. The body finally escaped the restrictions of formal clothing. Nightwear could feel extraordinarily comfortable by comparison. The bedroom became the place where the body was allowed to relax. For a wealthy woman who spent the day wearing carefully structured clothing and behaving according to strict social expectations, this private transition could be deeply significant. The same room could therefore represent freedom, not freedom in the modern political sense, but freedom from appearance. Behind the closed door, nobody needed to see the finished social image. The hair could be undone. The formal clothing could disappear. The face could be free of the public expression expected during social events. The person could simply sit beside the fire. This private transformation was one of the most intimate aspects of Victorian domestic life. The bedroom could also be filled with personal correspondence. Letters were central to 19th century communication. A person might receive several letters in a day, particularly if they had a large social network. Some could be business-related. Others might come from relatives, friends, or romantic interests. The bedroom was an ideal place to read private correspondence because it was one of the few spaces where interruptions were limited. A person might close the door, sit near the fire, and read a letter several times. The contents could change the entire mood of the evening. A happy letter could produce excitement. A troubling letter could keep someone awake. A letter from a distant family member could create homesickness. A romantic letter could be hidden in a drawer. The physicality of letters made them objects of memory. They could be kept for years. A modern message can disappear beneath thousands of other messages. A Victorian letter might remain in the same drawer for decades. Someone sleeping in the same bedroom years later could discover it. The room could therefore preserve private histories that were never meant to be seen by strangers. The bedroom could also be where people kept small objects of sentimental value: a photograph, a lock of hair, a piece of jewelry, a pressed flower, a handwritten note, a small gift. A religious object, these things might have little monetary value, but enormous emotional importance. At night, when the mansion became quiet, such objects could take on greater significance. A person might open a drawer and look at an old photograph before going to sleep. They might remember someone who was no longer alive. They might think about childhood. They might wonder about the future. The grand mansion could suddenly become a very personal place. This is one reason the bedroom was so different from the formal rooms downstairs. The drawing room was designed to impress. The dining room was designed for meals and social rituals. The entrance hall was designed to communicate status. The bedroom was designed for the person who actually lived there. Its contents could be more personal. Its arrangement could be less formal. Its memories could be deeper. Even the smallest objects could tell a story. A book beside the bed might reveal someone's interests. A particular chair might have belonged to a relative. A writing desk might contain years of correspondence. A dressing table might hold personal items. A photograph might reveal relationships that were never discussed publicly. The bedroom was therefore where the mansion's public image and private reality met. The house could appear perfect to visitors. But behind the bedroom door were ordinary human concerns. People worried about money. They worried about health. They worried about relationships. They worried about children. They worried about reputation. They worried about tomorrow. The grandeur of the house did not remove anxiety. In some cases, it may have intensified it. Maintaining a large estate was expensive. A wealthy family could have enormous responsibilities. There were servants to pay, buildings to maintain, land to manage, horses to feed, taxes and household expenses, social obligations, travel, clothing, entertaining guests. A person lying in a magnificent bed might still be thinking about financial problems. The room could be luxurious while the mind remained restless. This is another reminder that historical comfort was never the same as happiness. A grand bedroom could provide physical comfort. It could not guarantee emotional peace. Sometimes the quietness of the room might make worries more noticeable. During the day, there were distractions. At night, there were fewer. A person could stare into the fire and think about a difficult conversation from dinner. They could replay something someone had said. They could worry about an upcoming social event. They could wonder whether a letter would arrive tomorrow. They could think about a relationship. They could remember a death. The mansion became silent enough for the mind to become loud. The Victorian bedroom simply provided a different setting for it. One particularly powerful feature was the clock. A clock in a silent bedroom could become almost impossible to ignore. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was steady, it did not change. If you were sleepy, it could disappear into the background. If you were anxious, you might notice every single tick. A person struggling to sleep could become increasingly aware of time passing. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, each hour could feel significant. The clock became a reminder that morning was approaching. This could be comforting. It could also be frustrating. If you had an important appointment the next day, every passing hour could make you more anxious. The absence of an alarm did not mean people had no concern about waking on time. They had routines, clocks, servants, and natural light. In households where punctuality mattered, someone could be responsible for waking another person. This was another form of human alarm system. Instead of a digital alarm sounding beside the bed, a person could be awakened by a servant. A quiet knock, a voice, curtains opening, morning light. The day began. The difference is remarkable. Modern technology separates waking from other people. Victorian households often connected waking directly to another person's work. The servant's schedule determined when the family member began their day. The experience of sleeping in a Victorian mansion could become even stranger when you considered what happened during the hours when almost everyone was asleep. A modern house usually has a predictable nighttime background. The refrigerator hums, heating or air conditioning switches on and off. Pipes make occasional sounds, and electrical devices continue operating. In a Victorian mansion, the background was more physical and more unpredictable. The building breathed through its chimneys, shifted with temperature, responded to wind, and carried the sounds of people and animals through its corridors. The silence was never absolute. It was a silence filled with small signs of life. A sleeper might hear a faint movement above the ceiling and wonder whether it was an animal in the roof space. Mice and other small creatures could sometimes inhabit old buildings, particularly where food was stored nearby. A tiny scratching sound might come from somewhere inside a wall. During the day, nobody would notice it. At 2 in the morning, it could seem surprisingly loud. The person in bed might listen for several seconds, decide it was nothing, and pull the blanket closer. Then the sound would disappear. A few minutes later, the clock would strike. This kind of interrupted quiet could make the night feel almost theatrical. Nothing dramatic needed to happen. The imagination did most of the work. Large houses also had an enormous number of doors. Every room had a door, and many of those doors were heavy. Some might have locks, bolts, handles, or decorative hardware. At night, doors were usually closed to preserve warmth and privacy. A door opening somewhere in the building could therefore be surprisingly noticeable. The sound might travel through a corridor and echo faintly. If you were awake, you might wonder who had opened it. A servant? A family member? Someone returning from outside? A door moved by the wind? The answer might never be obvious. The mansion was full of ordinary mysteries. The same could happen with windows. A loose window could rattle during a storm. A curtain could move when air passed through a gap. A shutter could tap against a wall. Someone familiar with the house would know these sounds. A guest might not. This is one reason historic mansions can feel much more alive at night than during the day. Darkness removes visual certainty. You know the house is there, but you cannot see every part of it. The mind fills in the missing information. Victorian culture was particularly receptive to this atmosphere, because stories of ghosts, haunted houses, mysterious appearances, and supernatural events were extremely popular. People could enjoy such stories while still understanding that ordinary explanations existed. A creaking staircase was probably just a creaking staircase, but when you were alone in a dark bedroom, imagination could easily turn it into something more. The bedroom itself could contain objects that encouraged imagination. Portraits were common in wealthy homes. A large portrait might hang on a wall opposite the bed. During the day, the person in the painting was clearly visible. At night, only a vague shape might remain. A candle flickering from the bedside table could make the painted face appear to change expression. As shadows moved across it, the painting had not changed. The light had, but the human brain is extremely sensitive to faces, and a face partially hidden in darkness can appear strangely expressive. A Victorian sleeper might simply turn away from it. Another object that could seem different at night was a mirror. Mirrors were expensive and decorative, and large ones were often placed in bedrooms and dressing rooms. In weak light, a mirror could become almost like another dark window. If the sleeper caught a glimpse of their own reflection unexpectedly, it could be startling. This was particularly true if they woke suddenly. For a few seconds, they might not recognize the shape in the darkness. Then they would realize it was themselves. The room was familiar again. These little moments reveal something important about historical sleep. The environment mattered enormously. When technology was limited, the physical surroundings had a greater influence on the mind. Modern bedrooms are designed to be predictable. Victorian bedrooms could be beautiful, but they were not always predictable. The temperature changed, the light changed, the sounds changed, the fire changed, the weather changed, the house changed, and the sleeper adapted. The same adaptation applied to clothing. Night clothes were generally loose and designed for comfort, but they could also be relatively warm because rooms were not consistently heated. A person might sleep in a long nightshirt or nightdress, sometimes with additional layers depending on the season. The clothing itself was part of the bedding system. If the room was cold, the sleeper had to compensate through clothing and blankets. If the room was hot, they could remove layers, but ventilation became more important. There was no thermostat to solve the problem. The body had to adapt. This meant that Victorian sleep could feel much more physically connected to the seasons. Winter nights could be genuinely cold. The first moment of getting out of bed in the morning could be unpleasant. A warm bed was difficult to leave. The floor could be cold beneath bare feet. A dressing gown or robe could be essential. The fire in the bedroom could make a significant difference. A servant who entered early in the morning might need to revive it before the family got up. This simple task could determine whether the morning began comfortably or uncomfortably. Imagine waking beneath thick blankets and hearing someone quietly enter the room. You hear the fireplace being disturbed. There is the sound of coal or wood moving. The fire begins to catch. The room gradually warms. The curtains open. Cold morning light enters. You remain in bed for a moment longer. This would be an ordinary luxury for someone in a well-run household, but behind it was a servant who had already started working. That contrast appears repeatedly throughout Victorian domestic life. The person enjoying comfort often did not see the work required to create it. A polished bedroom was the final product of dozens of invisible processes. Even the polished wooden furniture required regular maintenance. Dust could accumulate quickly. Servants had to clean surfaces, polish wood, care for metal fittings, and keep fabrics in good condition. A mansion could contain hundreds of objects requiring attention. The bedroom was only one small part of the workload. The fact that it looked perfect in the evening meant someone had already spent time preparing it. This could make bedtime feel almost ceremonial in an affluent household. Everything was ready. The room had been inspected. The bed was prepared. The fire was burning. The water was waiting. The clothing was arranged. The curtains were positioned. The occupant simply had to enter. This was a very different concept of convenience from today's today. Convenience often means automation. Victorian convenience meant service. Someone was available to do things for you. That distinction is important. A wealthy Victorian household could provide extraordinary comfort without having modern technology. The technology was human. The servant carried the water. The maid prepared the clothing. The housekeeper organized the rooms. The valet arranged the wardrobe. The footman carried messages. The groom cared for horses. The cook prepared food. The gardener maintained the grounds. The mansion's comfort was powered by people. And this meant that the quality of sleep could depend on the quality of the household staff. A well-managed house could be remarkably comfortable. A poorly managed house could be frustrating. If servants were inexperienced, rooms might be cold. If the housekeeper was disorganized, bedding might not be ready. If the fire was badly prepared, the room could become smoky or cold. If windows were not properly closed, drafts could disturb sleep. The household system had to work. The mansion was a complex operation. This was especially true for large country estates. There could be dozens of bedrooms. If every bedroom needed fresh water, clean bedding, fire maintenance, and cleaning, the amount of work became enormous. The family might sleep peacefully because the servants were already thinking about these tasks. The bedroom was therefore part of a chain. Simone prepared it before bedtime. Simone maintained it during the night. Simone restored it in the morning. Then the process began again the next day. This repetitive work could continue for decades. One generation of servants might be replaced by another. The mansion remained. The routines remained. The rooms remained. This continuity gave grand houses their distinctive character. A family might have lived in the same bedroom for years. The wallpaper could become familiar. The carpet could wear in specific places. The bed could develop marks from use. The fireplace could accumulate decades of history. Even the windows could become familiar. People might know which window caught the morning sun and which remained shaded. They might know which room was best during summer. They might know which room was warmest in winter. This knowledge could be passed down. A new member of the household might be told, "That room is always cold," or "The wind rattles that window during storms." The mansion became a collection of practical knowledge. Every room had its habits. Every corridor had its sounds. Every fireplace had its personality. Every bedroom had its particular atmosphere. This is one reason historical houses can feel different, even when their architecture appears similar. The night could also reveal how much Victorian people depended on small physical comforts that are almost invisible to us today. Something as simple as the position of a pillow could make a difference. Pillows were not standardized in the way many modern bedding products are. Their shape, filling, firmness and number could vary. A wealthy household might have several pillows available, allowing the sleeper or servant to arrange them according to personal preference. Yet even a luxurious pillow could flatten, shift, or become uncomfortable during the night. The sleeper might wake, adjust it, turn it over, and settle back down. The same was true of blankets. There was no universal indoor temperature maintained throughout the night. A person might begin the evening feeling perfectly comfortable, and then wake later because the room had become colder as the fire died down. The solution was simple but physical. Pull another blanket upward, move closer to the fire, or call someone to tend it. In a mansion where servants were available, the sleeper could sometimes avoid getting out of bed altogether. A bell or other means of summoning assistance could bring someone to the room. This was an extraordinary level of personal service by modern standards. Imagine waking because you are cold, and rather than getting up to adjust the heating, simply pulling a cord and waiting for someone to appear. But that convenience also meant the bedroom was never entirely independent. Someone could arrive, someone could speak quietly, someone could adjust the fire. Then the person would leave, and the room would return to silence. For the servant, however, the experience was completely different. They had to leave their own bed, cross the house, perform the task and return. A request that lasted 2 minutes for the person in the grand bedroom could interrupt another person's sleep for half an hour. This difference is one of the clearest examples of how Victorian luxury operated. Comfort was often measured not only by what you possessed, but by how much effort you could make someone else perform on your behalf. The bedroom therefore represented privilege in a very practical sense. You did not have to carry the water. You did not have to clean the fireplace. You did not have to prepare the bed. You did not have to wash the sheets. You did not have to polish the furniture. You did not have to arrange your clothes. You did not have to wake early to begin these tasks. Someone else did, and because this work happened mostly outside the family's attention, the bedroom could appear almost magically comfortable. The illusion of effortless luxury depended on effort that was carefully hidden. This was particularly true in the morning. Before the wealthy resident even opened their eyes, the room could already have undergone a transformation. A servant might have entered quietly, opened the curtains, checked the fire, removed used water, and prepared clothing. The bedroom would be ready for another day before the person occupying it had fully awakened. The first sound might be a soft knock. "Good morning." The curtains would move. Cold or warm daylight would enter. The occupant might remain beneath the blankets for another few minutes. Outside, the estate was already active. A horse might be moving in the stable. A gardener might be starting work. The kitchen would be preparing breakfast. The servants' corridors would be filling with footsteps. The mansion was waking from the bottom upward. This made the morning feel different from the night. At midnight, the mansion seemed enormous and empty. At 7 or 8 in the morning, it became busy again. Doors opened, voices returned. The smell of food moved through the corridors. The fireplaces were revived, the house began functioning at full capacity, and the bedroom, which had been the centre of the night, became merely one part of the daytime routine. The bed itself could then be dismantled from its nighttime arrangement. The curtains around it might be opened, blankets could be folded, sheets could be pulled back to air, pillows could be moved, the mattress might be exposed to fresh air. A housemaid would restore order. This process could be surprisingly elaborate because the bedroom had to be prepared for another night's use. A clean, well-maintained bedroom was a sign that the household was functioning properly. If dust accumulated, if bedding smelled stale, if the fire was neglected, or if the room was poorly arranged, it could reflect badly on the housekeeper and the servants. In wealthy households, domestic management was a serious responsibility. The housekeeper might oversee dozens of people and countless tasks. The bedroom was part of her domain. She needed to know which rooms were occupied, which required cleaning, which needed fresh bedding, and which guests had particular preferences. The mansion's apparently effortless order depended on organization. This organization extended to storage. A bedroom could contain wardrobes large enough to hold extensive collections of clothing. Victorian clothing was often elaborate, and wealthy individuals could own numerous garments for different occasions. There might be separate clothes for morning, afternoon, dinner, travel, outdoor activities, formal events, and special occasions. The bedroom therefore contained a miniature wardrobe system. The clothing itself could also affect the room's atmosphere. Heavy fabrics, wool, velvet, silk, cotton, and linen, all had different textures and smells. Clothing could be stored in wardrobes, chests, trunks, or dressing rooms. A servant might prepare the next day's outfit before the occupant went to sleep. This meant that tomorrow was physically present in the bedroom. The person could look at the clothes waiting for the morning and know what the following day required. A formal suit might indicate an important meeting. A particular dress might be required for a dinner. Travel clothes could suggest an early departure. The bedroom was therefore a bridge between yesterday and tomorrow. At night, the person could think about the next day while surrounded by evidence of it. This could influence sleep. An upcoming event might create excitement. An unpleasant appointment might create anxiety. A journey might make someone restless. A romantic meeting might make someone unable to stop thinking. Victorian people were not immune to anticipation. They could lie awake just as easily as anyone today. The difference was what occupied their minds. Instead of checking messages, they might reread a letter. Instead of scrolling through social media, they might stare into the fire. Instead of watching a video, they might read a novel. Instead of checking the time on a phone, they might listen for the next clock chime. The mind still wandered. Only the distractions were different. For some people, the absence of constant entertainment might have encouraged deeper reflection. A person could spend a long time thinking without interruption. They might remember childhood experiences, imagine the future, worry about finances, think about family, or simply replay the day's conversations. The bedroom could become a place where thoughts became louder because the world became quieter. This could be comforting or uncomfortable, depending on the person. Someone who enjoyed solitude might treasure the night time. Someone prone to worry might find it difficult. A large mansion could amplify both experiences. There was something about lying awake in a huge house that could make one's thoughts feel larger. During the day, there were people everywhere. At night, the house seemed to retreat. A person could suddenly become aware of their own breathing. They could hear the ticking of the clock. They could feel the mattress beneath them. They could hear wind outside. The mansion became a shell around the individual. And if sleep refused to arrive, there was very little to do. Perhaps there was a book, perhaps a diary, perhaps a letter, perhaps a prayer, perhaps the person simply waited. This is one reason historical sleep routines should not always be imagined as perfectly peaceful. People had insomnia long before modern life. They experienced restless nights, nightmares, interrupted sleep, illness, pain. The difference was that they had fewer immediate ways to distract themselves from wakefulness. If you woke at 2 in the morning and could not sleep, you might remain awake for a long time. You might listen to the house, you might think. You might read by candlelight if you were willing to light one, or you might simply lie still. The night could feel very long. This was especially true during winter, when the hours of darkness were extensive. A person might retire early because there was little reason to remain active. Then they could wake in the middle of the night and discover that dawn was still several hours away. The darkness seemed endless. This does not mean everyone slept continuously from evening until morning. Human sleep patterns have varied across history, and individual routines differed. Some people woke naturally during the night and spent time awake before returning to sleep. Others slept more continuously. Household schedules and personal habits influenced the experience. The important point is that nighttime wakefulness was not unusual. A Victorian bedroom had to accommodate it. Books could be kept nearby, candles could be available, chairs could provide a place to sit, writing desks could provide something to do. The bedroom was not designed solely around unconscious sleep. It was a room for nighttime life. This becomes even clearer when considering the presence of sitting areas.